Filmspotting is presented by Regal Unlimited, the all-you-can-watch movie subscription pass that pays for itself in just 2 visits. Sign up now in the Regal app or at the link in the show description and use code FILMSPOT25, that's FILMSPOT25, to receive your discount.
Does it ever feel like you're a marketing professional just speaking into the void? But with LinkedIn ads, you can know you're reaching the right decision makers, a network of 130 million of them, in fact. You can even target buyers by job title, industry, company, seniority, skills, and did I say job title? See how you can avoid the void and reach the right buyers with LinkedIn ads. Spend $250 on your first campaign and get a free $250 credit for the next one. Get started at linkedin.com/campaign. Terms and conditions apply.
What kind of a show are you guys putting on here today?
You're not interested in art?
No.
Now look, we're going to do this thing. We're going to have a conversation.
From Chicago, this is Filmspotting, celebrating our 20th year. I'm Adam Kempenaar.
You feel this hope and possibility of a time, where people really felt like they could make a difference by the spaces they created. And I thought, I have to make a film here because there's such a story.
That's director Kogonada, who went on to make that film, his first, 2017's Columbus, which is set in Columbus, Indiana, a mecca for modernist architecture. We screened the film earlier this year as part of Filmspotting Fest, and Kogonada was kind enough to join us. We'll share our post-screening Q&A. Also from Filmspotting Fest, Slate's Dana Stevens on Satyajit Ray's PATHER Panchali. That and more, ahead on Filmspotting.
Hey, it's Paris. I love sparkly things, right? Like stars. Duh. And thanks to Hilton and AutoCamp, I just slept under them. Picture me, serving looks by the fire outside my luxurious Airstream, making s'mores with the kids, while a national park is our backdrop. The great outdoors meets Hilton hospitality. That's hot. Explore all the new ways to stay at Hilton.com. Hilton for the stay.
Welcome to Filmspotting. Adam flying solo this week with Josh's big move. Back in March of this year, we celebrated 20 years of Filmspotting with the first ever Filmspotting Fest. 6 films over 3 days at 2 great Chicago film institutions, the Gene Siskel Film Center and the Music Box. Ryan Johnson joined us for a screening of his debut film, Brick. Some critic friends joined us for screenings of Sean Baker's Tangerine, Jeff Nichols' Take Shelter, and Richard Linklater's Before Sunrise. And Slate Culture Gabfest critic and longtime friend of the show, Dana Stevens, joined us for one of the great directing debuts of all time, Satyajit Ray's PATHER Panchali. We'll share her conversation about the film with Josh later in the show. But first, Kogonada, the director's latest film, A Big, Bold, Beautiful Journey with Colin Farrell and Margot Robbie, comes to theaters later this month. But his first film, 2017's Columbus, made a huge impression on us. We gave it our Golden Brick Award, which goes to our favorite film of the year by a new or emerging filmmaker. Set in the modernist, architecture-rich city of Columbus, Indiana, John Cho plays Jin, the estranged son of an ailing architecture scholar. He connects with Haley Lou Richardson's Casey, a recent high school grad and modernist architecture appreciator trying to figure out her life. I've had a chance to interview Kogonada twice. He's one of the most thoughtful and insightful interview subjects I've had the pleasure of talking to. We were obviously thrilled when he agreed to join us at Filmspotting Fest. We spoke with him in front of an audience after a screening of Columbus. Here's that conversation. Ladies and gentlemen, Kogonada.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, and congratulations.
Thank you.
It's such
Thank you.
Big deal, 20 years. I actually have a story. I just finished a sound mix for my next film in Toronto, and the sound designer, after I'd left, he texted me and he said, I know what you're going to do this weekend. And he's like, because I listened to Filmspotting, he's like, I didn't want to tell you this while working, but he said, I hope you tell Josh and Adam. But he's like, I watched After Yang because I was listening to Filmspotting and they had recommended it. And then he said, and then it made me watch Columbus. And then all these years later, I'm doing, when I got a call about you being a sound designer, I was just like, oh my, and he's like, but I just want them to know that I would not have discovered that without, listening to Film Spotting. So,
Wow, that's a great story. I hope the collaboration was a fruitful one.
Yeah, he's incredible. Yeah. He's an incredible sounder. He did Priscilla and did Aronofsky's, work. So he's incredible. But yeah.
Okay, a professional, in other words.
Right.
So how are you about watching your work? When was the last time you saw Columbus?
It's been a minute, and it's like, wow, it was such a flood of memories, and having some distance. There's so many personal things there, but it's a good distance, because you're immediately, you always just kind of see all the, you're too close to it. But it was great. And it's great seeing it here. I have such memories of the Siskel Center. When I lived in Chicago, I remember when I was, a young cinephile, and they were doing an Ozu retrospective here, and it was a whole week. And this is before you could watch Ozu. I remember like ordering a DVD from like Singapore, and I was just reading about these movies that I wanted to see, and there wasn't a Criterion channel. And then suddenly they had a retrospective here, and I was like so excited, and I came to every screening, and there was just like a group of us who was just watching it all, and I was too shy to say anything to anyone, but I felt so close to everyone. I was like, oh, this is my family, and I'm not a religious person, but it felt so sacred that week. I just have such a deep memory of it. But I also remember that I was telling one of my friends, I was like, you have to come see Ozu with me. I don't know what it is, but it's life-changing. I can't, but just come to one of these. And he finally came, but I had been going to all of them, and he came one night, and then I was like exhausted, and I like fell asleep, while I was watching it. And he to this day ridicules me. He's like, you said it was life-changing, but you were asleep, I was like, I promise you. So if any of you guys fell asleep, I'm like, no problem, right? Because I know some of you guys have been watching everything, and, Kiarostami, it's always a compliment he says when people fall asleep in his films. So, yeah.
Can I ask you a question about the art of location scouting? Because it's a particular aspect of filmmaking that isn't always discussed, but clearly extra crucial for Columbus. And I imagine when you're approaching that for this movie, you have this city that is a treasure trove. So maybe the instinct is to think, well, that makes it easy. You show up and you have all of these options. So what was that process like? Was it going through? Did you take a tour and just as you're on a tour think, oh, we'll film here, we'll film here? Did you have a list of the main character like Cassie? Did you have a list of favorites you wanted to include? Did you write with places in mind, or did you get there and the places inspired some of the writing? How did location scouting work on this film?
Yeah, I think it was everything in some ways. I had just read about Columbus in a New York Times article. And, I was living in Chicago. My family was in Indiana at that time. So I was always driving, and I passed Columbus all the time, but I had no idea that it had all this architecture and I had interest in it. And I was just like, couldn't believe I was passing it. So I just stopped there one day to, or maybe at that time I was in New York and I was visiting my family. Anyways, I just knew suddenly I was like, I have to visit this place. And I wasn't thinking about a film or anything, and it had such an impact, just the space and really it, like I felt such melancholy like this, you feel this hope and possibility of a time, where people really felt like they could make a difference by the spaces they created. And after I left, I had thought, or even in the moment, I thought, I have to make a film here because there's such a story that exists in the city. And at the time, I was starting to think about parental, like this relationship between children and parents. And then so I went back and started talking to some people about it. And, I've talked to some people who are like, oh, people don't know any, and all of that kind of thing. And then, I started visiting. I didn't take a tour. I just started visiting places and I read about it. And I was, struggling about and kind of working through things as I was sort of writing it. So it had really, the writing came from the space itself. Yeah.
During the last Q&A, I was trying to make some connections between the films we've been watching here today. And not only is PATHER PANCHALI, which you were here for earlier, and you heard the great Q&A that Josh and Dana did, not only is that a film very much about the relationship between parents and children, but I was thinking about the line the mother says near the end about how she suddenly doesn't feel like she has any connection to this place that she lived, and this ancestral home is no longer connecting with her. And there's a line similar actually in this, along the lines of like, I no longer, it's Jin's line about people, you can grow up around a space and basically, take it for granted. Your line's more eloquent than my paraphrase. I apologize. But, and then in the end, the decision to ultimately move on or stay put and embrace, in a way, I'm making the connection that Jin is someone who, even though this is not his ancestral home, by choosing to stay at the end, coming to that conclusion, as long as he's needed there, he is embracing his heritage. He's embracing his past in a way that he didn't come to town expecting to do that. I guess my question for you is, did any of that, as you were watching PATHER PANCHALI, resonate? And has it previously when it comes to Satyajit Ray's work?
Yeah, I love Ray, and I had not seen that film in a long time. But yeah, I felt resonance. And the conversation, Josh, that you were having with Dana about modernity, and I was very much thinking about that, because I think it is the crisis of modernity is ongoing, to try to understand it. But I love it. I love that people are trying to find meaning in the context of the modern, and that is outside, part of the thing about modernity is you're letting go of tradition and religion, but we still crave meaning, right? And there's still that search. And I was thinking when I saw it today, when she's walking down, something very simple of like trying to get a job, and she's at the New Republic. And I was just thinking about when you're young at that age, you're just trying to figure out what you're going to do, and you're just craving a sense of purpose and meaning. And that is, again, like what it means to be modern beings. And I don't necessarily want it to, harken back to tradition, which is not necessarily kind to people of color or if you're a woman or something like that, but there's still that absence and void. And I was just thinking about that, she's walking to get a job, but then the space itself is trying to create meaning. That's the thing about the modern movement, was there was a period of time where people thought they could create something that really could change the world or could heal. And I long for that. The truth is, like the absence of that, just creating something for reaction or something. But, I still, want to believe that art, that there's something there that we can discover. Say.
I've seen this film, I think, at least 3 times before tonight, and never really paid close attention or gave much meaning to the discussion of marginalia. But as you're talking about finding meaning, doesn't marginalia, it begs you, it forces you to try to find meaning in it, because it's a mystery, right? Like you're trying to piece together the contextual clues, and they're just like later in the film we see them talking about what his dad wrote. What does it actually mean? Isn't that that's like architecture too? The building doesn't tell you how to feel about it, right? Or what to think about it. You have to decide what context matters and what it ultimately means to you. But even what we're doing here tonight and talking about film, trying to make film, isn't it all just about trying to find meaning?
Yeah. My existence is a struggle, right? I'm trying to, and so for me, it is like so much of this, I look at it and think, oh, at the time I thought maybe this is the only thing I'll ever make. And I had young kids and I was just like, what, and so, yeah. And I think that's right. I think that's, any opportunity that we all have, in this world, we're always kind of trying to figure that out. And marginalia, I was obsessed with marginalia at the time. I was a real nerdy person who, like, if I saw it, I was like, oh, there's some, this is going to help me like figure out my life.
Unlock.
Yeah, that's right. And I used to write things that were just like, like I was a serial killer. So I would just write little lines of things like nothing. And, and I just thought if anyone ever found that, they would just like, what is, why is he?
My notes tonight from the movie that I can't even read now.
Yeah. So, there's, did anyone recognize the pen that she was using? Anyone? What kind of pen is it? See, there we go. My fellow. Yeah. That's good. Yeah. So I put all these stuff. I used to carry this one notebook. I just like, it's embarrassing, but I loved it.
So you briefly talked about your feelings about Satyajit Ray and PATHER PANCHALI.
Yeah.
I love hearing filmmakers talk about the work of other filmmakers. So I want to take this opportunity because it's fresh on my mind with Bong Joon-ho having a new movie coming out next week, Mickey 17.
Yeah.
I finally took the time to watch the last 2 features of his I hadn't seen. So Barking Dogs Never Bite, and then Mother, actually, I had not seen yet. So
did that complete it? The
features for the features. Yeah. So I'm processing still. It was just a few days ago. But yeah, what do you make of his films? And, thinking whether you have a favorite or you have some, I imagine you don't have any holes you need to fill.
No. I mean, I just can't wait to watch his new film. I think Memories of a Murder is probably the film that I love. But I just recently watched Parasite again, and it's just, my son and I were talking about it, and I said, just like, that, I think that's a flawless, as far as like the execution and every shot. And I was like, I think the only flaw might be that it's flawless, that it has, that maybe I want a little bit because it just feels like such a perfectly constructed film, it's, so, but I like Memories of Murder because, and I love, first films, and I probably, maybe I'll never make a film, in some ways. I mean, this is so perfect or whatever, but if people ask me, what's your favorite Wes Anderson, I will like say Bottle Rockets or Rushmore, because there is something about that first film that is, to me, always stays with me, and like I like Sydney or Heart Aid and all of that kind of stuff, that there is something. And so, yeah.
Actually, I mentioned this last night, I think just out at the bar as we were having a conversation. John Irving, the writer, talks about the importance of first novels and says they're always the best because they've been working their whole life up to that point on it, right? Whether they knew it or consciously were doing it. And
Ryan Johnson even mentioned after Brick, I think he called out once or twice, Coen Brothers' Miller's Crossing, which again, not a first film, but in that early period where you could, I think it falls into that category with Rushmore.
I can't remember if I've mentioned this to you or not, but last fall I taught, I'm going to teach it again, but I was teaching a new class, producing film criticism at the University of Iowa in the journalism school, and the students were journalism students, not film students. So that was part of the fun, is getting to talk to them about film language and getting into shot selection and angles and editing, the whole thing. And the film that I made them watch first in the class to then show me that they could apply their understanding of those formal techniques was Columbus. I felt like it was perfect for that. Also because I thought as college students, they could potentially relate, very much to Casey's situation, and a line that we gave a lot of attention to. So it'll be funny if now you tell us, no, I didn't mean anything significant behind it whatsoever. But I love the conversation early in the film between Casey and her mom when her mother is critiquing the soup that she made. And she feels like it doesn't quite have enough flavor, needs a little bit more spice. And she says, I was going for something more nuanced, right? Feels to me a little bit like a perfect summation of the understanding and a good artist probably has about their relationship to their audience, that they may be trying to go for something that they think is very nuanced, and they want those flavors to linger, and they've put all this deliberation into how it's going to go, and some people are just going to say, yeah, I wanted more spice.
Right. Yeah. It's bland. Yeah. Now, there was nothing significant. No, there was very, yeah. At the time I was working on a dissertation about Ozu, and Ozu talks about aftertaste all the time, and he used to always say, "Oh, I'm just making tofu," and I never finished my dissertation. I was just like had all this stuff in my head about
graduate school.
Yeah. That's it. Again, it's like I heard him say that, and I was like, anyone else quit graduate school? Like, is there any? No. Good. I like how he reacted too. Like, that's not, that's exactly how I was feeling too, And that, I think about that all the time, because Ozu was in such he was making, I think it meant, and his writer, it meant a lot. They were trying to figure that out a little bit. And, and he's often accused of being bland if it doesn't resonate with you, but he was like really in search of that, and I just, and we're living in a certain moment, political moment. I just wanted to say too, I mean, and Dana, if you're here, I apologize. I'm going to talk about Ozu. Is Dana here? Hi, Dana. I'm going to talk about Ozu a little bit, but there's his films really if I was still an academic, I would write something about like the politics of tofu, because his films are never explicitly political. I say that because, we're living in certain times. But in some ways, his films are like a Satyajit Ray or a Kiarostami, who they don't ever they're not like, I'm making a political movie, but there's something about their taste for humanity that has had more profound political impact in me than anything, than the ones that are very political, because it deepened my sense. I think I just became more, liberal, more connected, more there was a deep taste for humanity and difference. And I just say that because in our time, things are going, whatever. But there is, in the realm of art, this need, I think, for things to exist that may not be explicitly political, but we have to retain a taste of humanity in a time in which you just want to vilify and dehumanize the whatever, and so there was something, I just remember that all of that was in my head, a little bit.
I think that's why Tangerine, which we started our day out, I framed in political terms, even though it is not a very overtly political movie, but I think it isn't exactly the way you're talking about.
That's right.
The common humanity, the recognition of difference,
Ebert, to have empathy, a cinema of empathy has such profound impact, and
I don't know if there was any political motivation behind this particular choice in Columbus, but the recurring decision to observe characters from a room away. So it's often there will be a doorway and we may not even see them in their entirety, or they'll come in and out, but we're often in the next room. What was the sort of reasoning, the logic? Was it strictly aesthetic because it provides nice framing? Yeah. What were you thinking about in having that be a constant?
Yeah. I mean, let me just say this about Filmspotting, okay? Because you guys are such good viewers, and again, the things that you champion and the way it's just really important. I think the other thing about being in Chicago is I just remember that there was this rhythm. You guys were a part of it, right? Of watching films and talking about films. And it was like Fridays, all the reviews came out, and I would read the Reader and the Tribune and the Sun. And then and there was this feeling that you were a part of some larger conversation, which I do feel like is sort of missing. But I think the film spottings, the blank checks, that kind of, the letterbox is kind of creating this desperate conversation. So anyways, thank you for being such an insightful viewer and asking. Yeah. I mean, really, I think is so vital to kind of keep this medium alive, which I feel encouraged by just by seeing everybody here. But for me, if you're trying to struggle to find meaning in a modern world, the context of that is absence, right? You're trying to understand it in this sort of knowing that how do we deal with absence, right? And the big death. And in this film, I knew that the dad was going to sort of represent big death, but really the story was going to be about this small death, which is any goodbye you have to say to anyone who you love, and it's not the final goodbye. And I just when children leave their parents, there's something both beautiful, it's necessary, and the end of something, and I just knew that echo would be throughout, because I wanted to constantly play this relationship between spaces that are both filled with people and absent of people. And I think that's the other thing about first films is I was just I just thought I was allowed, and I did, because it didn't cost a lot of money to make the film, but I was just oh yeah, nowadays you get just noted to death. How come we don't see people and all of that, and I have to fight for it. But back then I just was yeah, they're just going to talk to someone and you're never going to see them, or you're not going to hear their voices and you're not going to see what they see. And it just was so thrilling for me, and I didn't know any better, and I just thought I'm going to make it if no one, so, but yeah, that felt really important, that relationship,
I can't believe we only have a couple minutes left, but I did want to at least get this out there, and we're talking about parents and children, so I'm very happy to have my daughter Sophie here tonight, who you get a chance to meet. She's, Sophie, yeah, round of applause. That won't inflate her ego at all. But as you know, big fan of your work, big fan of this film as well as After Yang. And so I said, what's the thing you got to know? I'll pose it to him. I know somebody. I'll ask him the question. I said, and so here is her question. How do you think your time as a critic and academic has impacted your creative process? Did you always know you wanted to create and that you had the capacity for it? And then did you ever feel inhibited by it? You devoted great video essays and dissected the work and the meaning and the emotion and everything that you love about Ozu and Wes Anderson and Bresson. I think that's what she's getting at when asking about feeling inhibited. Ever feel like, well, how can I compete with these filmmakers?
Oh yeah, 100%. Yeah. I mean, it never feels like, yeah. The answer is yes. I think I feel, like that's unattainable, but I enjoy the pursuit of it. But I don't think I'll ever attain all the people that really have had. I don't. I think at my best, I'm just trying to pursue something that had that whatever they were chasing after, I want to chase after it, even however imperfectly. But, it is a part, like, I don't like critics. And, I'm so excited to meet Dana because I've been reading her forever, and you guys can hate my films in the future and stuff. Not trying to flatter you guys to get good reviews because you guys can genuinely hate it. But I do feel like that's like a part of like that like as a critic, you are writing about it, I think, or you're interacting with it because you love it or you want to love it or you want it, and so even as a filmmaker, I still feel that side of it. But, there's that side of like Jen, and I think when I was writing about it, part of the reason why I'm so glad to actually be making it is you can also get really cynical when it becomes a kind of, the academia was kind of killing it for me, to be honest. I found myself like having to dissect Ozu in a way that I felt like I was killing it. And that's a lot of that, the Jen part of it. That was, it was like I was putting a conversation between young me, who was like coming alive to art and it was changing me, and this me that I was like writing about, and I was trying to understand that too. That was a bit of a conversation that I was having. Yeah. So
looking ahead to where your work might go and thinking still about locations or even just space, because I think in After Yang the sense of space is so crucial as well. Is there a place you would like to, like a dream place you'd like to film? You may not even know what the story is yet. And maybe it's a building, maybe it's a city or a region. And yeah, have you been somewhere
so
you
fun.
thought sometime I might like to make something here?
I've just finished making maybe the biggest film I'll ever make, and it's like it's in whatever, and I just have such a taste to make something really small again, and my cinematographer and I were just talking about this very thing, like, let's just do something that's not a part of the machine and get back to it. And all we're talking about right now is like a play, like what is the place that we want to shoot? So we're actually literally having that discussion. But I will mention something that's not like I've often wanted to shoot in Taipei when I was there. It's like such a mix of the ancient and the modern. You can go down an alley that feels like 1,000 years old and then turn around the corner and just be, so, and then it's like Edward Yang. So it's just like, oh God, I would love to shoot in Taipei. I'd love to shoot in Hong Kong. But we're going to really answer that because we're like looking at cities right now to do something really independent and small to counter what, yeah.
So. Do you want to take a moment here as we wind down to thank Rebecca Fons and Emily Long and Jack and Blair and everybody here at the Gene Siskel Film Center who's just made this day so wonderful.
Thank you so much.
And you were just talking about, as critics, wanting to love films, and I'll go back to what we've been talking about. Yes, that's true, but it's also, I think, even more than that, about trying to find meaning and trying to find meaning in your response to the film. Ultimately, I think is what really drives us and I think a lot of critics. So this has been part of that process tonight, and I just
20 years.
That's
amazing.
And I can't tell you how humbled and honored and grateful we are to have you take your time to be part of it.
Thank you.
We got to rush up, but can you answer? I was thinking about a question for you, which is like, what was you started this before people knew what podcasts were. Can you just quickly tell me what was the spark of there's this thing?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Well, Sam out there, we wanted to talk about films together. We needed an outlet. We needed an excuse. And as Sam has said recently, everyone, Filmspotting listeners will love this. We needed some stakes. It couldn't just be us talking in a vacuum. We wanted to be judged. We wanted other people to listen to it. We had to be on the hook for, seeing something every week and processing it and talking about it with each other and delivering the show every week. That was what it was. And so we committed to that. We didn't know we'd be sitting here 20 years later with the likes of you, but like that was it. We just loved having conversations with each other about film, and the fact that we still get to do this today with Sam, with Josh, of course, it's special. This whole fest so far has been really wonderful. Thank you to all of you who have made it happen.
Yeah, that's great. That's great.
Kogonada, everyone.
Our heartfelt thanks to Kogonada again for joining us at Filmspotting Fest back in March. Columbus is available VOD on most platforms, and you can probably get it via Canopy through your library. His new film, A Big, Bold, Beautiful Journey, hits theaters on September 19th. You know, as I'm recording this, I still have not seen the new Darren Aronofsky with Austin Butler. Looks really good. Caught Stealing. Want to see that in the theater. Spinal Tap 2 coming out September 12th. Could see that at a Regal cinema near me. How about some special events? We dropped The Breakfast Club from the archive back in our feed. We talked about it for its 30th anniversary. Now it has turned 40. Man, those kids, they're all grown up, probably turned exactly like they thought into their parents. That's back in theaters September 7th and 10th. The Sound of Music. The Sound of Music is now 60. It's still a blind spot for me. I need to remedy that. We thought about reviewing it on the show, doing a little blind cow. Yes, Sacred Cow for Josh, blind spotting for me. Yeah, we went in a different direction, it seems, with our schedule, but maybe I just need to go alone and take in the magic that is The Sound of Music. I could do that. That is going to have a limited engagement, a Fathom event at Regal Cinemas, and I could see all of those movies for free at Regal with Regal Unlimited, the all-you-can-watch movie subscription pass that pays for itself in just 2 visits. Our listeners can see endless movies for less. If you sign up for Regal Unlimited using our code FilmSpot25, you'll get 10% off a 3-month subscription. You can see any standard 2D movie anytime with no blackout dates or restrictions. And with Regal Unlimited, you don't just save money on tickets, you also save on snacks. Members get 10% off all non-alcoholic concessions. Sign up now in the Regal app, or you can click the link in the description in whatever podcast app you're using and use code FilmSpot25. That's FilmSpot25 to receive your discount.
With a major selection of the looks your kiddos love starting at just $4 in the Walmart app, a new school year means a stylish new them. Who knew? Find skater skirts and Crocs that say, I'm casual but cool. Sparkly sneakers that say, it's my classroom, you're just learning in it. And preppy polos that say, I'm the teacher's pet, even if they're mommy's menace at home. Find their favorite styles starting at just $4 in the app. The Walmart you thought you knew is now new.
As far back as I can remember, I always wanted to be a gangster.
That's from What Else? Goodfellas, which celebrates its 35th anniversary this month. Next week, Josh and I will give it the Pantheon Project treatment, an in-depth review of Scorsese's beloved 1990 film, which has been in the Filmspotting Pantheon, our eccentrically assembled movie Hall of Fame, since 2007. Along with that, we may have thoughts on a few more new and recent releases and results from the current deeply flawed Filmspotting poll, asking you to choose one and only one animation studio, Pixar or Studio Ghibli, Buzz and Woody, or your neighbor Totoro. Vote in that poll and leave a comment at filmspotting.net. Now playing on our sister podcast, The Next Picture Show, looking at cinema's present via its past. It's a good one. Part 2 of their The Kids Are Not All Right pairing, Weapons, and Adam Egoyan's 1998 Oscar nominee and one of my favorite films and books, The Sweet Hereafter. New episodes of The Next Picture Show drop every Tuesday wherever you get your podcasts. A bit of Ravi Shankar's score for Satyajit Ray's landmark 1955 film, Pather Panchali. Ray's film was part of the Saturday lineup at the Siskel Film Center at Filmspotting Fest earlier this year. Filmspotting Fest was our 3-day, 6-film celebration of 20 years of this show. And Saturday was a marathon. We appreciate everybody who toughed it out, all of the films, all 3 films that were part of that day, and all the Q&As actually 4 films that day, starting with an 11 a.m. screening of Sean Baker's Tangerine. That was followed by a conversation about the movie with Vulture critic Allison Wilmore. We shared the audio from that Q&A, that discussion, on episode 1010 earlier this year. Then it was Jeff Nichols' 2011 film Take Shelter. Allison's former podcast partner, Matt Singer, joined us for a very personal conversation about that one. We're going to share that later this year. Up next was PATHER PANCHALI, Ray's masterpiece, right out of the gate debut film, and the first film in what became the Apu trilogy, which traced the life of a Bengali boy from rural childhood to school and love and work in the city. After that screening, Josh welcomed Slate Culture Gabfest critic Dana Stevens to the stage. Here's their chat.
Dana of Slate, of course, and the veteran of many film spotting live shows. We were trying to figure out 4 or 5. Is that what we thought?
Yeah, I believe so. We've done 1 in New York and we've done 3 here. So.
And you were a listener well before?
Yeah,
that,
well,
right?
I was thinking about the chronology. You started in 2005.
That's right.
Yeah, I was not yet a film critic then. I actually became Slate's film critic the following year. I was doing some work and freelancing for Slate and things like that, but I became a film critic almost exactly when your podcast began. So we kind of grew up together.
Yeah, exactly. And I was reading you from the beginning on Slate and just following your career.
Well, I was listening from the beginning, so yeah.
So it works well. And yeah, as a matter of fact, so I joined the show 2012. And not long after that is when, we'll see if you remember this, we did Filmspotting 400 live here with Michael Phillips from the Chicago Tribune. Do you remember what our top 5 was for that show?
No.
I forget the top 5s myself. We did top 5 things we learned from the movies. So I wanted to share one of your picks here that you did from back then. And I think it's applicable to our current state of affairs. You said one thing you learned from the movies is keep on going, no matter what, drawn from Buster Keaton's 1 Week, which of course makes sense. You also joined us in 2022 to promote your book on Keaton, Cameraman. And we screened. Wonderful book. If you don't have it, check it out. We screened Cameraman there and, talked about it afterwards. So thanks for sticking with us all these years.
Oh, yeah. Well, it's a pleasure to be asked back. You know, it's funny because both of those things that you just mentioned relate back to this film in a way. First of all, Satyajit Ray was a huge fan of Buster Keaton and grew up watching Keaton and Chaplin and Lloyd and lots of Western cinema, probably more than he watched Indian cinema. And so that was a big part of his formation. And also, what is the message of the end of this film, if not keep on going no matter what?
Yeah, no doubt. So we're going to get to PATHER PANCHALI for sure. But I did, given that sort of shared history we've had, I did want to start with a general podcasting question, if you don't mind. So I, started listening to Slate Culture Gabfest as well. So we both have a somewhat similar path in that we started as critics, as writers, and thought about what the craft was in that way, and then shifted to this podcast format. So can you talk a little bit about how that shift went for you, and if you think how you think about the two differently? You still do both. I continue to write. And what's that switch like when you flip it, or do you not feel like it's a switch that has
it's
to flip?
definitely a switch.
Okay.
Yeah. And then often I'll write and podcast on the same film, which is a good chance to go back and revisit in whichever comes second, right? What you didn't get to the first time around. I mean, not at all to denigrate what we do as podcasters, but I will say that podcasting on a movie is much, much easier than writing on it. If you think about it, I think if after you see a movie and you were sitting with a friend, would you rather talk about it into a mic for 15 minutes, which is what I do on the podcast, or sit and painfully try to express in words how you felt about it for, 6 to 10 hours? I mean, it's more labor intensive to write about something.
So what is your preparation for going on Culture Gab Fest? If let's say it's a movie you haven't written about, what sort of prep do you go through? Do you have notes down? Have you written like a rough draft review that's not necessarily going to be published?
No, I don't take in notes because I feel like when you're sitting behind a mic, and I'm sure you guys, because how spontaneous you sound, you may bring in notes, but you don't script anything about what you say, right? That is what makes it a free-flowing conversation. No, I just try to be as reasonably prepared as I can. I mean, it's never enough. You always feel like, oh, I should have seen more films by this director. Or if it's something that you really need to have seen, like the prequel, right, or the prior thing in the series, or sometimes if it's based on a really, really well-known popular book, I'll try to read at least some of the book, right? If it's the kind of movie that most people seeing it would have read the book, then I want to come in with a little knowledge of the book too. But yeah, I think the same as you. I'm probably just cramming as fast as I can to try to have something to say.
A lot of cramming, and I think I've found the magic trick is to, yes, sound that sort of casual and spontaneous, and certainly genuinely bring a lot of that. But at least I found I have to have a lot of preparation to build on or to rely upon or to have that somewhere in the background. So,
yeah. I mean, you have to have, I'll often print out the cast list, or, if it's an older film, I'll sort of learn something about the production history, as I did for this film, because you don't want to go in there just saying, here's a movie I saw that lasted 2 hours, because that movie obviously comes from a whole history of other movies and that creator's other work and so forth.
Let's start with that production history, because I know, being a researcher as you are, that you did take the time to look into some of that beyond what you already knew for PATHER PANCHALI. So yeah, can you share some of that with us? You already alluded to Ray being a fan of Keaton. I know that he was, very influenced by Western cinema, but maybe what's some other production history stuff or time of release stuff that might be good to hear about?
I mean, for this film in particular, it really, I think, helps you. It enriches your understanding of the movie and also just makes your jaw drop to the ground to hear some of the production history of this movie. Because first of all, it's his debut film, right? Like Satyajit Ray had never made a film before. Not only that, his cinematographer, who he had just met, I'll tell you how they met in a second, whose name is, and I wrote it down so I don't get all of these Indian names mixed up, Subrata Mitra, who remained his DP for quite a while. He did all 3 of the Apu films, for example. But Subrata Mitra had never picked up a film camera before. He had worked as an assistant with Jean Renoir, who came to India to make the movie The River. And this was how Satyajit Ray, part of how Satyajit Ray decided that he wanted to become a filmmaker, is that in Calcutta, where he lived, the great French filmmaker Jean Renoir came to make a movie called The River that's about colonialists. It's about an English colonial family in India. And it's one of Martin Scorsese's favorite films, actually, which I didn't know. And Satyajit Ray, who was about 29, 30 at the time, a huge film fan, sort of hung out and watched some of the filming and became friends with Jean Renoir and just sat around and talked to him about a movie he would like to make, which eventually became PATHER PANCHALI. And it was on that set that he met this young man, 20 years old, who was handling the camera and sort of production assistant stuff. And that was Sumatra Mitra, who became his cinematographer. So all of this came together in a very kind of DIY way. Satyajit Ray was a graphic designer at the time and a book illustrator, basically worked in commercial art and had illustrated the novel that PATHER PANCHALI is based on. And you can look at his illustrations and some of them become actual images in the movie. That moment when Durga and Apu are sitting under the monsoon and she's wrapping him in her shawl looks almost exactly like an illustration that he made for the book. So he storyboarded it. He had it all in his brain. But it took a really long time for him to raise the money to make it, including during filming. So it took, I think, about 2.5 years to film this because they had to keep breaking off because they ran out of money. They got some money from the Bengali government and they got some money from different investors, but they would run out and he would have to go back to his graphic design job and keep working. At one point, he tells the story that they needed to film the monsoon and they missed monsoon season because they didn't have money at that time. So they had to wait for the next year in order to film that.
And do you know much about the release? I mean, we think of it now as this world cinema classic. Was that a reputation that took a while to gather? Was it fairly immediate after the release? Do you have much on that?
Yeah, I mean, that brings up a whole wider fact about film history, which is sort of the whole idea of an international success was pretty new at this moment. Like Rashomon, at least the Western release of Rashomon, I think, was 1950, the Kurosawa movie that, sort of broke through. It sort of brought Asian cinema to the West in a big way. And so I think it only would have been after 1950 that anybody would have even thought about bringing an Indian film to the West. And certainly in kind of indie, where you could consider this an indie film in a way. It's not any part of the studio system. It's self-financed, et cetera. For that to break through is even more unusual. And I think in a way, the long production history helped with that because during this period that he was agonizingly raising funds and his wife sold her jewelry and, they did all these things to get the film made, a lot of people saw the footage. He was showing bits of it to different investors to try to get interest in it. And that included some Western people. So Renoir was one of them. And there was a guy from New York, from MoMA, I think, who came to India to do some research and saw some of it. And then MoMA ended up giving him some money to finish filming it. In fact, this was seen in New York before it was ever seen in India. They brought it for some kind of Indian festival at MoMA, sort of an art display or something like that. And it was considered enough of a splash there that then it came back to Calcutta and started to be seen. So it was a bit of a slow rollout.
Yeah.
But Pauline Kael wrote about it. You know, lots of people at the time did. Actually, Pauline Kael would have been a bit later than that. But Bosley Crowther of the New York Times, right, wrote a sort of strangely exoticizing and racist review of it. He did like the movie, but I actually wrote down a couple of the things he said because it gives you a bit of an idea of what the mainstream press sounded like when talking about Asian film. He said that it was a baffling mosaic of candid and crude domestic scenes. And he wrapped it up saying, as we say, it is quite exotic. You know, so he kind of regarded it as this exotic curiosity, very slow. He thought it was way too slow. But it did slowly start to make an impression. And by the late 50s, it was a beloved film.
All right, well, let's hear from a better critic, you, about how how you interact with this movie, your personal history with it, if you have much, or like when you first saw it, what you made of it after screening it today. The word that kept popping into my mind this afternoon was purity. And I don't mean that in a moral sense. I mean in like an elemental sense. Like if there was a cinematic periodic table, PATHER PANCHALI would have to be on it.
Right.
I don't know what I mean by that, but it's just like it's basic.
Elemental, yeah. I see what you mean.
So that was my impression today. But when do you remember when you first saw it? And if your feelings about it have changed over time and where they were at today?
I do. I know that this was the first Ray film that I saw. And I believe I probably saw it at the Pacific Film Archive in Berkeley, where I was a grad student in the 90s. And it was one of the places of my film education. Is there a PFA fan out there? Yes. And it's the kind of thing that they would have brought in. I'm sure I must have seen the trilogy at that time. But this is the one that struck me that I remember, being sort of transformed by. And I've seen it many times since then. I wrote on it for Slate in 2015 when Criterion restored it. And the restoration story is kind of insane, too, because the negative had burned and melted. And, they had to do so much to get this movie back to how it looks now.
Incredible.
So pristine. Looks fantastic. And so I wrote on the whole trilogy for Slate then. And I actually wanted to read another quote, which appears in that piece from Kurosawa, which you may have heard. This is a very famous quote about Ray. I think it may be the most perfect criticism of him that there could be. It's so condensed. There's nothing to add. But Kurosawa in 1975, so 20 years after the movie came out, said, "Not to have seen the films of Satyajit Ray means existing in the world without ever having seen the sun and the moon," which is so beautiful.
Elemental.
And it speaks to what you were saying, that this, even though I just told you about this production history that was so patchy, it has this organic feeling, like it just grew out of the ground like that. It just feels like this force of nature that just surged up.
To get some of the nature scenery here from, first-time filmmaker, first-time cinematographer, the reeds and the way the sunlight catches them, the clouds, the water. I mean, it's just unbelievable. And we saw, the beginning was the history of the restoration. And as you mentioned, that what they were working with to be able to build it up to this, we're just really fortunate to have it. I know one of the things that you mentioned we should probably touch on is this idea of transitions in the film. So because we do go through periods of time, rather large periods of time, in subtle ways, I feel like, slippery ways, maybe. So, what did you notice this time in terms of the film's transitions?
Yeah. I sent Josh that note last night. Transitions, we have to talk about them because it really, really struck me watching this again that almost every scene transition is a dissolve, which is really unusual, right? There's lots and lots and lots of dissolves. And then there's occasionally fades to black. And only within scenes, of course, there's normal cutting in between shots. But there's just a real insistence on making images flow into one another. And of course, flow and flowing water is this recurring image. I mean, water is so important, right? And to me, all the memorable images of this film that you take away involve water. The incredible upside down shot when they're following the sweet cellar near the beginning and you see them reflected upside down in the pond. Or I want to talk more about this later, closer to the ending, that great transitional montage with the water skimmers moving over the water and the raindrops beginning. And it's really long. It's really extensive. And you kind of feel like we're moving into a different chapter. And sure enough, it's a different chapter because what happens as a result of that rainstorm, we lose Durga, But the idea that this movie is kind of a flowing river, which is something else Kurosawa said about it. I didn't even know he had said that till doing this research. But when I watch it, I always feel like you're caught up in the river of the film. It's like the camera's flowing along, the water is flowing, and all those transitions that are so fluid just move you from one time to the next. But there's a mystery how much time passes during this movie, right? It's hard to figure out. A few times that time is mentioned, like Durga says to her friend who's getting married, it's a month and 2 days until your wedding. And there's the letter from the traveling fathers, and she says he's been gone for 5 months. But we don't know how long those months are separated by or how long the auntie was away when she went away. But there's this sense of repetition. I think my theory about the dissolve transitions is that they're almost like, if you speak a Romance language, they're like an imperfect tense compared to a perfect tense. You know, it's like a continued action in the past compared to a thing that happens just one time. Because to me, the transitions seem to suggest the repetitive cycle of life in the village. You know, these things have happened many times, like when the band comes to play or the different festivals. It's like this cyclical life, and the temporal marks in the movie somehow communicate that so perfectly.
Yeah, there's a poeticism to that, but there's also, as you're describing it, it makes me think of the mother's experience. So the mother played by Karuna Banerjee, how she seems to exist in this loop, this cycle, but out of time, especially as grief becomes more something heavier to bear for her, where she's almost in her own time and space. And when her husband returns, it's especially striking how he's could be a ghost to her as far as she's concerned at first when he arrives. So yeah, it's playing with time in so many slippery ways. We've been talking a lot about water, nature images and settings, but we get little bursts of modernity in this film. And I think they're key. I think that's one of the crucial things this movie is exploring. You know, a village like this, which is stuck in time in some ways, and the intrusions of modernity. So the train that we hear first, right? That one night where the family is just quietly going about their business, and then the train intrudes. Or when brother and sister go out to the fields and they're looking at the electrical towers, and there's an intrusion they're planted in the water, in nature there. So I'm curious what you made of kind of that element, which is, as I was watching it now, after we've seen the wonderful All We Imagine Is Light, another Indian film from this year, and that concludes with some characters returning to a village, an ancestral village in a way, that dynamic is still in contemporary India a thing I thought was interesting. But yeah, in terms of how it plays out in PATHER PANCHALI, this modernity and tradition tension, what do you make of that?
It's really sophisticated because it's not a nostalgic movie. It was accused at the time by some of being a that it idealized or sort of romanticized poverty, or that it was looking back at a village past and sort of frightened of modernity. There is very unsettling music when you see those towers, you know, the music, which by the way is by Ravi Shankar, the great sitar player.
Amazing.
Who taught George Harrison to play sitar. It's an unbelievable score that completely stands on its own. You can just listen to the soundtrack as an album. But yeah, the music gets modern there and strange when they're looking at the electrical towers. I mean, this kind of brings up the placement of this movie. Is it a movie about India's past or about India's future? And the fact that it was made right after the partition of India and Pakistan, right after the decolonization of India and the creation of basically taking Bengal, which is where this takes place. It's a Bengali movie in Bengali language. And Bengal had just been divided between West and East. And I'm not going to know my history well enough to get every detail right. But essentially, I think it is safe to say that the Muslims and the Hindus had sort of been split up. You know, the ethnicity of Bengal had been turned into two different regions. And so this movie is in a way looking back at a time when there was a village life that was simpler than that. But I would not say at all, especially given the end and the fact that they leave the ancestral home, that it's idealizing that time. And then if you keep on watching the trilogy, the next section, they're in Benares, where they move to at the end of this film. And then finally, Apu, as an adult, moves to Calcutta, the big city. So nostalgic or not, it is a movie about forward movement it's a series rather, about forward movement into the modern age.
If anyone here is not seen the other two films in the trilogy, hopefully this will move you to do that. It is one complete story. It's a life. It's a full life that you experience.
Apu is such a complete character. I mean, I don't know about you all, but I almost always have a problem in films where a new actor comes in to play someone as they grow up. You know, it's so rare that it actually seems like an older version of that person. It was something that the recent Brazilian movie I'm Still Here had a very clever card up its sleeve, where the older woman version of the main character is played by her own mother, who is also a great Brazilian actress. And, you know, you're not lucky enough to just say, oh, here's an actress who, you know, looks exactly like that person but is much older. But even though the three Apus don't really resemble each other physically, you completely believe it's the same boy because the film has just showed you so clearly who he is.
Yeah. Quickly on the modernity thing, watching, especially I think that scene with the electrical towers, but even regarding the train or listening to the train, I think the reason you can't identify this as nostalgic or progressive towards the future, but really existing in the tension is that it gives both siblings distinct relationships to the potential change. So I think of Apu when you first hear the train, he looks up, the rest of the family doesn't engage with it. And even the first time I saw it, I felt like, oh, he's gone. He's not going to live here forever, because when he hears that train, he's excited by it. And when they go to the electrical towers, you'll notice it's more subtle. Apu is curious. He's not quite as excited, but as they both take turns listening to that hum, which the music, captures, you notice how she has a little bit more of a frown in that moment. Like, what are these? Is this dangerous? Whereas Apu has more of this curiosity. He's not afraid of it. And I think that echoes where he'll go, as you said, the rest of his life. Yeah.
Well, think of the first time you see Apu when he's not a little baby. It's his eye, just his bright eye coming through that little hole in the blanket when she opens it up. It's just one of the great character introductions of all time. And you know so much about him from that, and from the incredible boy they found, Subir Banerjee, who plays him, who was unprofessional, just a kid, actually just that the director's wife spotted in Calcutta and said, this is your Apu. He had been trying to cast the right kid. But yeah, something about focusing on his eye and his curiosity. You just know that he's a boy whose mind is going places.
Let's talk about the performances a little bit while we still have some time here. So as you said, Subir Banerjee as Apu, Durga, the sister, when she's older, Uma Dasgupta. How do these register to you? Because they're a combination of very natural, almost without much experience in the case of Apu, but also more theatrical in some scenes, is the grieving scene we saw when the father learns what has happened to his daughter. So yeah, how do you kind of gauge performances in a film like this?
I mean, I know that Satyajit Ray didn't want to have known professionals. I think the father was the most known. I think he had done some films before and would have been familiar, but not a star. The woman who plays the mother had only done sort of local regional theater, but she had acted a little bit. Uma Dasgupta, who plays the teenage Durga, had, again, acted a little bit, but was not famous. Subir Banerjee was just a kid from the street that they found. By the way, just as a note, 3 or 4 of the people in this movie are named Banerjee, but they're not related. I think it's just a very, very common name. But they all seem to be, there's not any sense of inconsistency among their acting styles, right? I mean, to me, they all feel like found actors in the sense that nobody is theatrical. But I will say that the way the mother plays many scenes when she's, trying to refill the rice and, her scenes of grief, I feel like she belongs in a tradition of melodrama. She makes me think of Anna Magnani or one of those actresses who play, just grand operatic emotions so beautifully.
Yeah, you're right. We should mention the father, Kanu Banerjee, to your point, the last name. And I was struck how Apu has to be his kid in real life, I'm thinking. Their smiles, right? They both share that enthusiasm we've been talking about, maybe misguided a bit on the father's part, And then also Auntie, we need to mention, Chunabala Devi, as this just kind of mysterious figure, like where she exists in the village, where she exists in the household. Where does her joy come from? To go back to your, that top 5 choice you made about carrying on and moving on. She's the one who carries on repeatedly to a new home, but yet such an elemental figure in the film, I think.
Yeah, well, that actress had been around since the silent era. And I think basically they went looking for her. Like, is she still around? And she was living in the red light district of Calcutta and was very old. And during that period of 2.5 years that they're trying to get funding and they have to keep pausing, their big fear was, is this actress going to die? And we're not going to be able to finish it. But she made it through. And that was what Rai was so grateful for, that she lived in time to finish the film. And also the kids didn't grow so fast that, they seem to be roughly within the same year of age.
When you talked about the extended production, I was thinking, how did those kids not just sprout up? But
I presume that they must have filmed it in order, or at least tried to film it in order so that it would seem natural that they were growing up. But yeah, you don't really see them changing a lot.
I think we have to wrap up pretty quickly here. Is there any last thoughts you had about
PATHER Panchali? I had a question for you, and I don't know if you'll have time to answer, but just in, regarding your book and your interest in faith and religion on film, just what you thought of this movie's representation of faith and prayer, because that's a complicated thing, I think, for Rai. I mean, he was not a pious man himself, but he made a lot of films about devotion and piety.
there's a ton there, and I don't have the background in what the many prayers we see in this film mean in that context. And clearly there's also an economic element. I mean, his livelihood is tied to this identity as a priest. So yeah, I would love to actually read something that talks about what those prayers are and what they might mean for this family. For my book project, it was more looking at categories of Christian prayer than looking at films like this and saying, what might it mirror or echo for me? And so interestingly enough, The World of Apu is the one I wrote about in the book, because one of the categories of prayer I write about prayers of joy. And World of Apu, Adam's favorite, is, partially this marital relationship. And it's where Apu ends up. And there's loss and heartsick there too, but a very joyful film. I'm watching PATHER PANCHALI again today and thinking, this is a joyful film as well. I don't think I included it immediately because of the deaths, obviously, and the family leaves. And it seems silly to say as it just ended, but if you think about all the moments in that movie where there is joy expressed, a gratefulness, a gratitude for sun, for play, for fruit, for life, for just being alive. And maybe it takes a family living on the edge this close to truly appreciate that, as you'll hear some people say who are in dire situations, thankful to be awake today. I'm grateful to be alive today. This is a family that experiences that. So yeah, I didn't write a lot about PATHER PANCHALI. I focused more on The World of Apu, but I think I could have after watching it again today. So thanks for asking. Thank you.
Dana's been one of our favorite guests over the years of doing this show, and it was a thrill to have her in person at Filmspotting Fest. And I know that was a highlight conversation for many of our attendees. Our thanks again to Dana. You can find her work over at slate.com. For more about Filmspotting Fest, you can visit filmspottingfest.com. That's our show. You can find me and the show at Instagram, Facebook, Letterboxd at Filmspotting. Also, find us at YouTube at Filmspotting. Josh is at Larson on Film on most of those platforms as well, and over on Blue Sky. Filmspotting is independently produced and listener supported. Support the show by joining the Filmspotting family at filmspottingfamily.com. You can listen early and ad-free, plus get a weekly newsletter, monthly bonus episodes, and access to the entire show archive. For show t-shirts and other merch, go to filmspotting.net/shop. In that archive, you can find Kogonada interviews about Columbus, episode 650, and After Yang, episode 868. Our Satyajit Ray marathon from 2015 included conversations about PATHER PANCHALI, Aparajito, that was The Unvanquished, as it is also known, Apur Sansar, The World of Apu, The Music Room, The Big City, The Lonely Wife. It was one of our favorite marathons ever. Out now, streaming in VOD, a movie we kind of loved. Reviewed last week on the show, 1029, Highest to Lowest, the new Spike Lee, is now out on Apple TV+. Angel-Headed Hipster, the documentary about Mark Bolan, which I talked about a little bit on episode 1026, that's also out VOD. In limited release, a new film starring Andre Holland as a writer navigating complicated relationships in a rapidly changing Brooklyn. It's a directing debut that premiered at this year's Sundance called Love, Brooklyn. Preparation for the Next Life, directed by Bing Liu, another Golden Brick winner like Kogonada, who made the great documentary Minding the Gap. This is a film about a Uyghur woman who migrates to New York City and meets and falls in love with an army vet played by Fred Heckinger, who has just returned from 3 tours in the Middle East. Also out in limited release, The Threesome, directed by Chad Hartigan, who made Morris from America and Little Fish. It stars Zoe Deutsch and Ruby Cruz and Jonah Hoyer-King as the titular threesome. Katie Walsh says, when you order a sex farce and get a sweet, affecting, nuanced exploration of modern relationships instead, anchored by incredible performances and cinematography, that's the Chad Hartigan promise. Okay, who knew? Out wide, The Conjuring, Last Rites, Hamilton, a 10th anniversary theatrical release of the musical. Twinless, 2 young men meet in a twin bereavement support group and form an unlikely bromance. Next week, it is our Pantheon Project review of Goodfellas at 35. We'll see what else we can get up to, and we will hear from Josh Larson in his new abode in Scotland. Filmspotting is produced by Golden Joe Dassault and Sam Van Hallgren. Without Sam and Golden Joe, the show wouldn't go. Our production assistant is Sophie Kempenar, and special thanks to everyone at WBEZ Chicago. More information is available at WBEZ.org. For Filmspotting, I'm Adam Kempenar. Thanks for listening.
This conversation can serve no purpose anymore. Goodbye.
Filmspotting is listener supported. Join the Filmspotting family at filmspottingfamily.com and get access to ad-free episodes, monthly bonus shows, our weekly newsletter, and for the first time, all in one place, the entire Filmspotting archive going back to 2005. That's at filmspottingfamily.com.